Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. How you all doing out there today? As regular listeners will know, at the end of every episode, I always ask you to email me in and share your insights, questions, and stories. And these conversations often lead me to great guests. And that's one of the reasons I love recording this podcast, those moments of serendipity, and prove that technology works best when it brings people together. And today's guest is a great example of that, because her name is Sophia Matveeva, and she is a tech entrepreneur who also teaches the basics of technology for non-technical professionals. And she has taught at London's Business School and has recently finished leading a Blackstone x Techstars accelerator at the University of Texas in El Paso. And I'm a big fan of her podcast, and we both share the same passion for building the bridge between techies and non-techies, but we're building that bridge from opposite sides, so buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to London so we can speak with Sophia about all this and her podcast Tech For Non-Techies and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hello everybody, so great to be here. My name is Sophia, and I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I'm onto my second company now, and it's called Tech For Non-Techies, and we teach smart, non-technical professionals how to succeed in today's innovation economy, whether that's through founding a tech business or just understanding how to speak tech so you can do your job really well. And we've got online courses and the Tech For Non-Techies podcast. And I also teach my courses at London Business Schools and various business schools around the world. So that's me.
And before we started recording the podcast today, I was sharing with you my story of how I was sat in those IT meeting rooms, watching everybody's eyes go into the back of their head, thinking about what they want for tea whenever the techie guy started speaking. As you're a tech entrepreneur that also teaches the basics of technology to non-technical professionals. This is an area I'm very passionate about, and I'd love to learn more about your origin story. So can I ask that you share where your love of tech came from and what put you on the path that you're on today?
Well, I came to it from exactly the opposite background to you, Neil, which is why I really love this conversation, because I do think that there is this massive digital skills gap, but there's also a massive perception gap, essentially, between the non-technical people and the technical people. It's like the Capulets and whatever the other ones are called. I forgot. So I started my career in the media in London, and then I worked in private equity, and then I got my MBA at Chicago Booth. And for those of you who don't know, Chicago Booth is consistently ranked as the global #1 business school. It's where Barack Obama was teaching before he went into politics. The reason why I'm telling you this is obviously I want to impress you, but also, I got this MBA. I got $180,000 worth of debt to get this MBA. And I wanted to get out of, frankly, the boring world of finance into the digital innovation tech economy. And what I saw in business school was that I learned all about tech strategy. So I could talk to you about the strategy of Android versus Apple, but I didn't know what a tech stack was. Yeah. I didn't know just very simple terms like what is an API. And I then decided, not knowing what I didn't know, or the false confidence that we all have at the beginning of something like, I'll figure it out. I thought, well, I have an idea for a tech-enabled business. And I started working on it, and we got into one of the top accelerators in the US. And it was me and a team of people from business school. Again, all smart people. Nobody had a single clue about technology. So we somehow managed to, raise a bit of money. And then I actually hired a tech team, which was a disaster because I did not know the words that they were saying to me. So what I would do is they would say words, and I was thinking, well, I'm the CEO. I've raised all of this money. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. And so I'd literally go home and secretly Google all of these words that they'd say to me. But the thing is, Neil, with tech people, even with the most well-meaning ones, they explain jargon with jargon.
Yeah.
And so you Google, what is a tech stack? And then you'll get it. Well, it is where a back end meets a front end. And you're like, well, yeah, that does not help me. what am I going to do with this? And so essentially, I ended up learning on the job. So my first company is a fashion tech company called Enti, and we created an app which was used by thousands of people around the world. Our algorithms were used by thousands of people around the world. Were, like Mashable's app of the day, for example. So actually, there were successes, but in order to get to them, I had to learn on the job how to work with developers, how to work with designers, how to set goals, how to translate business goals into tech goals. And I didn't know any of this. And what I found super annoying, and I'm sure that some people in your audience would identify with this, is that you want to know about tech, you know that it's important, and also you're interested. But if you don't have a technical background, you don't even know where to get started. And so when you want to learn something, you get suggested all of these coding courses. And I think that for some people, that is definitely the right thing to do. But for a lot of people, it's not the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to suit their temperament. Like, I tried learning to code. It was a disaster. I spent 3 hours coding a little blue square into a little black square. 3 hours of my life. Like, I look back at that and I think, my God, I could have had a nap. I could have watched a movie. I could have done so many fun things. And so I do think that for non-technical professionals, if we want to progress, we do need to learn the core concepts of technology. We need to know, what is an algorithm? How do developers put it together? What is the logic? So what is the logic of going from idea to a live app? I think that, frankly, to have a successful career in today's economy, you do need to know this stuff, because it's kind of the modern version of just literacy. But I don't think you need to create the whole thing yourself, which is where I think, for example, a lot of the government programs about getting people into STEM, I think that they are very well-meaning, but I actually think that they can end up taking people in the wrong direction. Because if somebody is excellent at coding and that's what they want to do, that's where their passion is and it makes their soul sing, fantastic. But there are people like me who get far more excited on the business side, on the communication side. If somebody's a brilliant lawyer, I would rather that they were a brilliant lawyer.
Yeah.
But it's very likely that the law firm where they're working is going through digital transformation. So they need to know what that actually means and how to work with tech people. Or if they're a lawyer, they might have tech clients. In order for them to be a good lawyer for a tech client, they need to understand what on earth their tech client is talking about when they are talking about, changing their servers, or when they're talking, when the conversation about Amazon Web Services or privacy, when all of these conversations are happening, they need to have the basics of how the stuff gets made. But their talent is arguing in court, or their talent is understanding how to use the legal system to help their clients. And frankly, I would rather a world where people who are, brilliant at coding were doing the coding, and people who are brilliant communicators, brilliant business people, they were doing their job, but just in a more tech literate way. So that's a very long answer to your question.
No, I completely agree with you. And what I find really fascinating is we both come from almost different worlds and different sides of that meeting room table that we were talking about a few minutes ago. But we both reached the same conclusion there. And it's like wanting to bridge the gap between the techies and the non-techies. So from there, though, of course, you went on to create Tech For Non-Techies, because it is exactly what you needed when you began delving into that jargon-filled technology sector with all those acronyms. So can I ask that you share that story with me too? Because I think it's fantastic.
It's interesting because Tech For Non-Techies was an accident. So when I was running my first company, I started writing for Forbes about entrepreneurship and technology, and essentially my founder journey. And then I thought, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to know as a non-technical founder. And if you listen to the Silicon Valley guys, they basically say, well, if you're a non-technical founder, you're a bit of a second-class citizen. You need to learn to code. Otherwise, you're basically support staff to all the smart people. And I was thinking, well, I've got 180 grand in debt, so I don't really fancy any more education. And also, when am I going to do this? I'm running a company. I've got investors involved now. So then I thought, well, I've got this Forbes thing. So I'm just going to contact all of these successful non-technical founders and investors who invest in them and basically say to them, what am I supposed to do when I go to work? And I started writing up these articles, and I started writing up what I was learning as well on the job. And those articles became my most popular articles in Forbes. And I started being asked to speak on the subject. And as a result of what I was learning, my company was doing better. And then those talks became courses. And literally somebody from London Business School came to one of my talks. It was a current student. I'll remember him forever. And he said, well, this is great, but can you come and teach my classmates about this? And you don't turn an offer like that down. So I came and I taught, and that was 3 years ago now. And Tech For Non-Techies ended up, well, first it was literally just talks, then a course, then I opened the course that I was teaching at London Business School, and I put it online on techfornontechies.co. And the podcast was also born out of that. So in this example, it was really the demand of people that took me in that direction. But also, I think because what I see is that it's not just the knowledge that people need; it's the right knowledge, but it's also the confidence, and the confidence to admit also that they don't know things. Because I find that often in the tech world, if you go to a hackathon and you don't know what the jargon is, it can feel extremely intimidating. And so literally when I was just talking about these subjects, I think that it resonated with a lot of people who are thinking, well, I generally feel pretty smart. Like, I'm generally pretty good at what I do. Like, I achieve things, but when I get into this tech thing, I feel like I have just discovered fire. And this is why I think the company and the podcast and the courses, they grew, because I do think that there's this feeling of, I want to understand, but nobody's explaining it to me, and I don't want to feel stupid. And what I'm saying to people is that you're not stupid, but nobody knows this stuff when you come out of the womb. Nobody knows what a tech stack is when they're born.
And it's such an inspiring story here. And I'm sure the words are going to resonate with people listening all over the world, because the facts of the matter are, you are a non-technical founder that has created apps and algorithms that have been used by thousands. And as you said a few moments ago, you won the App of the Day by Mashable and were featured by Inc., the BBC, and I could go on and on with the list of accolades you've got there. So can you tell me more about your experience? Because I really do think it will inspire so many other non-technical founders listening all over the world that have maybe got big dreams, got big ideas, but have put them to the side thinking, well, I can't bring it to life. But because your story proves that you can, can't you?
Well, you can. And I did it through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and also a lot of wasted money. Because there was nothing like what I'm doing out back then. So first of all, if you have an idea for a tech-enabled business, or if you're doing innovation at a large company, my first bit of advice is that actually you don't need to learn to code. And this is the mistake that I made, because when I came out of business school, I didn't know anything about technology. And so naturally you have this tendency to think, well, let me just learn all the stuff that I don't know. And that's when you end up essentially wasting money and time and stress. And I definitely ended up doing that. What really helped me was working with a product team that was very patient with me. And they also taught me how they like to work with people. But, I think first of all, I got very lucky with those people. But secondly, I think it also took a lot of time, because essentially I was the boss and my team had to tell me that I was a rubbish boss. In order for that to happen, you do need to have a dynamic in your team where your team is able to tell you that, and then you are able to hear it, digest it, and think, well, actually, they are right. let me try to get better. I'm not saying that I'm a perfect person, but you do need to have an environment where that conversation can happen. And you also need to hire the kind of robust people who will tell you this. So in my story, first, I didn't know anything at all, which led to this team rebellion. And then we ended up co-creating this company. It's a fashion tech company. Essentially, our main product is an app where women can get feedback from professional stylists. So you can take a photo and ask a question like, shall I wear this? Or is this bag really worth $500? And a professional stylist will give you an answer. And so you pay a subscription to speak to the stylist. So basically, it's not one of those affiliate things where you're always told, like, yes, it's a green jumpsuit, 3 sizes too small for you, but it looks great. No, if it's not a good idea, you will be told. And I ended up in a situation where NT was growing in the right direction. As a non-technical founder, finally, I figured out how to set the right goals and how to work with people. And so that system was working. But as Tech For Non-Techies was also growing, it basically became a very kind of impossible situation, because no matter how brilliant your systems are, and no matter even if you know what you're doing, there's still only one of you. There are still only 24 hours in the day, and you still need to sleep. So the situation that we're in now is that I am in negotiations to exit NT, so other people can work on the IP and take that forward, so I can work full-time on Tech For Non-Techies. And so the reason why I wanted to share that with people, and I wanted to give this story some light, is that I first started going into the world of tech entrepreneurship feeling extremely ashamed of my non-technical founder status. And also, if you just allow yourself to kind of go down the same rabbit holes that I did, the same thing will happen to you. You will also end up spending hours coding a little square into a different color. You will also end up taking courses that you just don't need, that also, cost thousands. So what you need to do is you need to find the right people to listen to. Because if you listen to the Silicon Valley engineers, they will essentially say that unless you're exactly like us, you're a bit of a moron. Well, you know what? They can think that. And to be honest, if they look at the way the world is right now, it looks like they have reason to think that. They built Facebook, they built Microsoft, they're billionaires. The world is really working out for them. But I do want people to know that there are other voices, and it's just those voices, they take a little bit more effort to find. Because, for example, if you just Google, what am I supposed to know as a non-technical founder, you'll often come up with information from Andreessen Horowitz. And Andreessen Horowitz is one of the leading VC firms in Silicon Valley, and they talk about how essentially non-technical founders absolutely have to have the adult supervision of a technical co-founder. This is why you end up having senior executives in large companies, senior executives who are very successful people. They want to understand digital innovation, and what they end up doing is they end up taking a coding boot camp. Now, is that a good use of their time? No. And so if you just go for the first search in Google, if you just listen to the people who've been talking about tech for longest, and they are the Silicon Valley developers, the Silicon Valley tech bros, the likes of Andreessen Horowitz, you will go down that rabbit hole. But what I would suggest to people is, if they want to succeed in tech, whether that's through building a company or by understanding how digital innovation works or working with tech clients, for example, you need to find people who you identify with and see how they've done it. Which is what I've done, which is what I did with Forbes. I was looking for non-technical founders. I wanted to speak to them, and I wanted to learn, okay, how did they do it? And it's, in general, what I saw is that they learned how to co-create. That's exactly what I learned to do. You need to learn the concepts. You need to know how to speak tech. So it's much more about having a common language, and also having the humility to ask, being honest and saying, I don't know what you're talking about, but also kind of understanding that some things you need to know, some things you do need to learn, but other things you don't need to learn. So, for example, one of the ways that I like to work out whether it's something that I really need to know about or not is, how does a tech decision impact costs, and how does it impact user experience? So, these are questions that every single person can ask. Like, we're all users of a digital product. If you're listening to this, you are using some kind of podcast app. You know what user experience is. You also know what cost is. Literally, if you ask those two questions, you will then start being able to speak to developers and speak to designers in a way that both of you are essentially moving towards the same goal. Does that help?
Absolutely. And I think you've got to have woken up quite a few people listening all over the world. I'm curious, having listened to those startup founders and the lessons that you've learned along the way, is there any other advice that you would offer to listeners on how to transition into a career in tech for those non-technical professionals that are listening all over the world?
So that's actually something that we often discuss on the Tech For Non-Techies podcast, because, as the name suggests, most people are outside of the tech industry.
Yeah.
So we take a very pragmatic approach. So it's about, the fact that you're an adult, you have responsibilities, you probably have a job. Yes, you do have these lofty, ambitious goals, but we've got to be pragmatic, because you probably don't have much time, you probably don't have much energy. Yeah. So the first thing is learn the core concept. So learn what is a tech stack, learn what is an API. Again, that's something that you can learn with us at Tech For Non-Techies, or you can literally listen to the podcast, listen to your podcast. These are concepts that you can learn. You don't need to learn to code yourself. Secondly, is I would say you need to get involved in the creation of something. And you can either create something yourself, or you can get involved with an organization that is doing something. So, for example, there are lots of no-code solutions that you can use if you just want to build a very simple product. So you could use Bubble, for example, to build something that looks and feels like an app. But you don't even have to do something that complicated. So, for example, one of the people who came to speak to us, and listeners can listen to her interview on Tech For Non-Techies, she was a journalist at The Telegraph, so the Telegraph Media Group. Very non-technical job. Now she's a product manager at the Telegraph Media Group. And the reason why she made this transition is that as a journalist, she was obviously using the tech tools that the Telegraph Media Group had created for journalists. And she started, giving her opinions and sharing them with these other people whom she didn't really know. So, these other people at the end of an email, she was giving them feedback, and they were just like, oh, this is interesting. This person seems to want to help us in our job. And so they ended up collaborating, and she ended up getting more and more involved in making digital product. And then she realized, well, actually, this is something I'm more interested in than journalism. But the way she ended up transitioning to them is that she was helping them co-create a product, not as a techie, but as a user. And so for anybody who wants to understand tech, transition to tech, learn the core concept and start co-creating something. And remember, you already have valuable knowledge as a user. And so in this journalist case, when a product management job opened up at the Telegraph, they literally said to her, look, you already know how we think. Yeah, you'll need some training, but you already know kind of what kind of problems we're solving. Do you want to come along and help us solve them? And so that's what she's doing now. And so I think this is a really good example of how it is curiosity, it is networking, and it is also understanding the user experience that can help you transition into tech. It is not going to take a coding course. In this lady's example, I honestly don't think that if she just left her job and took a 6-month coding course for 10 grand, that she would have actually been able to get that same job. So that's something that I would really leave with people as inspiration, that it's possible and it's probably easier than you think.
Wow, what a great story and fantastic advice there as well. And on that checklist for non-technical founders of what they need to know about tech, especially when they want to hold their own in conversation with techies and technical teams, is there anything else that you would put on that list?
So what I'd say that you need to do is you need to understand who the key professionals involved in building a software product are. So whether it's an app or a site or an algorithm. In general, those professionals are going to be a user experience designer. So you need to understand a bit about the design process, so design thinking. Then after the design process, the designs go to developers. And usually there's a back-end developer and a front-end developer. I'm speaking in very general, very broad strokes, but you need to know broad strokes, really. So you need to know that essentially there is this process that starts with an idea. The idea becomes a design. The design goes to engineers. You need to understand a bit about what they do. And then when you release the product, what you need to do is you need to analyze how people use it. So that's analysis. So those are essentially three things that you need to have a broad understanding of: design thinking, the basics of a tech stack, and also how to analyze whether what you have made is useful or not, which will then give you some ideas about what to do next. And the final thing that you need to have a basic grasp of is, how is an algorithm made? So what is data? What is big data? How much data do you actually need to make something? I often see people with an idea saying, well, I'm going to make this AI product. And I think, well, do you have the data? Because if you don't, you're going to have to get it from somewhere, and that's going to be an expensive endeavor. So you need to understand the basics of how this stuff fits together. And understanding the basics is not that hard, because what you need to do is, once you understand the basics of those things, so design thinking, the tech stack, analysis, and AI/big data, then you can essentially speak tech, and either you can co-create, or you can understand what your clients are talking about, or essentially you can start transitioning your career.
And something else I think we're both seeing right now is that investors are increasingly turning towards non-technical founders. So I'm curious, what do you think that means for the industry?
I think it's a good thing, obviously. What I think it means for the industry, well, several things. So first of all, I do think that we're actually going to get more interesting products coming out there, because the developer mindset, and developers have made wonderful, useful things, but also it's a very specific kind of mindset. And so developers we all tend to solve problems for people like us. So right now we have lots and lots of solutions for white men who live in Silicon Valley. So that's why there are so many, takeaway delivery apps and laundry services, because they can't cook and they don't want to clean their pants. Now, I am, not particularly that interested in either one. I mean, I have a takeaway now and again, but really, as a woman in my 30s, those are not my key concerns. And so the thing is, I do think that non-technical founders bring with them the understanding of a user experience, their own user experience. They understand their own problems. They understand problems that people like them have, which basically means that if you remove the barrier of being held hostage by a technical co-founder, or you're removing the barrier of, we only invest in technical founders, if you take that away, actually you're going to have many more solutions come to different problems. So just as a consumer, I'm quite excited about what this is going to mean. But also on the investment side, it means that we are going to end up getting some really interesting returns, as in higher returns. Because, as we've seen with the ride-hailing wars, so there were a bunch of ride-hailing apps, and what ended up happening, so they were competing for VC money. It was great for consumers. We weren't paying much for our Uber rides, but essentially it wasn't a particularly great business case. Same with the takeaway delivery services, because essentially it's the same idea as competing for the same space with lots and lots of money. But if you have a diversity of ideas, then actually you're going to, by definition, have less competition, which means that you are going to have more and more success. But finally, just on what I've been thinking about recently, is that if you remove the barrier of technology, which I think we're getting close to that point, what you end up competing on is basically everything else that a business needs. So, do you understand your users? Are you good at marketing? Is the problem that you're solving actually a big problem? And these are all big and important business questions that often tech startups actually fail to answer, but you only find out that they never thought about the business questions after you've spent millions of dollars in development, because sometimes that's what it costs. And so if you take that away, you can actually understand, well, does this team really understand business? Does this team understand marketing? Is this problem worth solving? So I do think that we're going to have an acceleration in startups as well. And I also think we're going to have higher marketing costs as a result.
Incredibly cool. And I think something we're both united on as well is getting people listening to both of our podcasts, wherever they may be, and get them to break out of those self-imposed limitations they've put on themselves, and also things like imposter syndrome and overcoming that to get out there and build things. So as a call to action for anyone listening on the sidelines to our podcast conversation today, can you tell them why non-technical founders can and should be building businesses, and also why more non-technical professionals getting involved in tech as founders, investors, and innovators could bring fantastic things to the industry too? And I think it's diversity of thought is so needed, isn't it, right now?
Absolutely. Well, so what I would say to that is just something that really made me think is that even my coffee shop has an app. So we cannot escape anymore.
Yeah.
The digital innovation revolution is everywhere. It's not just a bunch of tech dudes. So essentially, you have to know how the stuff is made. You're participating in it. You can either participate in it as a sheep, somebody who's just using all of the stuff and you don't know how it works, or you can be an active participant. You're participating whatever, either way, unless you have decided to live in a cave, in which case you're probably not listening to this podcast. So the one thing that I would say to people who are sitting there and thinking, well, should I get involved? I'd say, well, actually, you are involved. It's too late. If you have a Gales app or a Starbucks app, you're already involved. You're listening to the podcast, you're already involved. So the next step that I would say is you need to remove some of that fear. And you're not going to do it by turning up to a hackathon where you are the only non-technical person. I have done this. And you won't know anything. And then you'll just go home and you'll lick your bruises and put your face in a bunch of ice cream. I have done this. Do not do this. What you need to do is you need to find people with whom you have some kind of identification with, and then see how those people have succeeded in getting into the tech world. So learn how if you want to be a non-technical founder, learn how non-technical founders have done it. We speak to a lot of people. I speak to a lot of people who are non-technical founders on the podcast. If you can do that, or you can literally Google successful non-technical founders. See how they have done it, because you need to get the knowledge, but you also need to get inspiration. If you want to transition career, think of Juliet's story, the Telegraph journalist I told you about. Learn those stories. See that there are people like you who did not know the first thing about technology, who weren't interested in technology, and who are now actually having very successful careers in tech. But what you need to do is A, understand you're already participating, and then B, find people who resonate with you, find people who you have something in common with, and learn how they did it, because it's perfectly possible. And it's also quite fun.
And if you are listening to this podcast in a cave, please email me. Say you're a long-time listener, first-time emailer to techblogwriter@outlook.com. But seriously, though, so we can appeal to everybody listening. What if somebody listening doesn't want to be a founder but just wants to learn about tech? What would you suggest to them?
Well, funny you say this, because literally we're launching a new course called How to Speak Tech for Managers. And the reason why I saw that, why we're doing this, is that I saw that people who have no intention of being founders have been taking my course, Tech For Non-Technical Founders. And I then started asking them, like, why are you doing this? And they said, well, because there was nothing else. I need to learn this stuff. And okay, fine, I'll kind of go to the entrepreneurship classes or maybe not go to them, but I need to learn how to do this. So actually, the How to Speak Tech course is launching very soon. So just go to the Tech For Non-Techies website or just listen to the podcast and I'll tell you more about it. So if you don't want to become a founder, I feel you. It is a hard job. And also, to be honest, I think doing innovation at a large company, I think it is really interesting and really fun. So you need to learn the core concepts, which is, again, what I'm telling you. And also another thing is that I'll be aware of there's this kind of dearth of consultants. There are a lot of consultants who work with large corporates who talk about innovation and they will give you innovation quadrants. But when you actually start talking to them about, well, what does this mean? How is this thing built? How is this technical decision going to impact the business? They don't have a clue, because essentially what they've done is they've read some TechCrunch articles, maybe they've read a couple of books, and they're very good in PowerPoint. I have seen those people. I've had the misfortune of actually working with some of those people. I would be very wary of those people. They generally charge a fortune, and a lot of the time they don't know what they're talking about. Those are not the right people to learn from. What you need to learn is you need to learn from people who have an understanding of the technology industry, but are also going to safeguard your time and your sanity and not try to teach you absolutely everything because you don't need to know it. So again, if you want to learn with me, fantastic. If you don't want to learn with me, what I would suggest you do is just be aware of the people who are just going to talk to you about general innovation terms and actually don't know anything about how this stuff gets built. Because it's the understanding of how it gets built, who it gets built by, and how technical decisions coincide with business decisions. That's what you really need to know. So you do need to work with somebody who has some actual experience of building something, getting it out there, and also charging money for it.
Fantastic advice. And I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to come on and share your story with me today. But I'm also going to ask you now if you can share something about the soundtrack to your story too. I'm curious, is there a particular song or piece of music that has accompanied you throughout your career in tech, or just helps you get your head in the zone before you go and deliver one of your keynotes or go into one of those big meetings? Is there a particular song that means anything to you that we can add to our Spotify playlist?
So I'm really curious what you've got on your Spotify. I wonder if this is going to be a different one. So I'm going to say Milord by Edith Piaf. So it's a really, really happy, fun song. And it kind of signifies, basically she's singing about this posh hoity-toity guy who is clearly a bit sad. And she is this poor girl and she's basically saying, oh, come on, like, come over, sit at my table, smile. It can't be that bad. Maybe we'll have a dance, and it's this kind of jokey song of, come on, it's all right. The world still goes on. And it just, it's not a particularly serious song, but I love it because it puts me in a good mood. And I do think that in the world of business, we do tend to take ourselves very seriously. And it's really good to just listen to something that puts you in a good mood, makes you laugh a bit, and then you can go and speak to people and give them that same energy rather than, here I am with my new PowerPoint presentation, which is, nobody wants that. I think we all had enough of Zoom presentations.
We sure have as well. I will proudly add that to the playlist. I had a touch of class to the playlist too. Oh. Great choice. But before I let you go, for anyone listening that would like to discover your podcast, find you online, or contact your team if they've got any questions, what's the best way of doing that?
Oh, absolutely. So Tech For Non-Techies podcast, wherever you're listening to podcasts. Also, you can contact me on Instagram, again on Tech For Non-Techies, or on Twitter, which is Sophia Matveeva. And I will give you that for the show notes. It's SOPHIA MATVEEVA on Twitter.
Fantastic. Well, I'm a subscriber of your podcast. I love what you've done here. I think we're on a mutual mission here to build that bridge between techies and non-techies. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing your story with me today. I really appreciate it.
I loved being on. Thank you so much. Have a fabulous day.
Just love chatting with Sophia today. And the key message for me was that non-technical founders can and should build businesses. And the emphasis on STEM education is well-meaning, but it can be misguided because tech is not just for those who studied STEM subjects. And to succeed in tech, the key skill is to learn to create with tech teams. And that means learning, yes, of course, but not necessarily retraining. And there are just a few things that I took away from chatting to today's guests. But over to you. I'd love to hear your takeaways, insights, questions. If you disagree with me or Sophia on anything, whatever it is, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. I'm the easiest guy in the world to find. So I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. I'll return again tomorrow with another guest, but a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.